Hey everyone, welcome to the Worship Artistry podcast. My name is Jason Houtsma, and with me, as always, is
Christina Kislanko.
Perfect. Nailed it that time.
I said it, not you.
Well, that doesn't mean that you're going to say it right.
It's true.
You sometimes throw accents on a lot of different things.
It is my name.
I know, but you say a lot of things very differently, different accents.
On purpose.
Yeah, in the office. So that's what kind of throws some of the confusion
And
on.
I didn't sing my name.
That's true. Or put your hand by your ear when you sang it.
Yes, I do that often.
Well, I think we're hoping this sounds better. We keep your
Hopefully.
microphone keeps morphing.
I know. I guess we'll figure it out. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, let us do that. How are you this week?
I'm great. Easter's coming up.
It is.
I should have.
Do you feel ready? Do you feel ready?
I do. We know we don't usually do anything crazy unique. Like we don't plan a brand new program or anything, but the worship is always very special. The worship time, just the songs and everything. It is more triumphant and it's beautiful. I actually have rehearsal tonight.
I have rehearsal in like an hour.
Oh.
Well, this is the first time. So our church has been meeting in another church's building. And so we're actually combining gatherings.
Oh, that's really cool.
It is really cool. It's also
that's amazing.
It'll be really interesting because we have pretty different cultures. And so kind of putting it all together, we really want it to be this like really joining thing. So we're putting on a pancake breakfast for everybody. And then we're going to do the gathering, which means that I'm singing with the worship leader over there, Janet, for the first time ever. So I hope she's not disappointed.
That's amazing.
That's basically what it comes down to.
That's really cool. That reminds me of we did something in our town on the National Day of Prayer, I think, and it was all the churches coming together. And because we have a Slavic church, and there was a Spanish church, and I think we had Chinese church. Like we had so many different cultures represented, and we did, I think, How Great Is Our God in all the different languages.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was amazing. And that was several years ago, but I still remember. It was so cool.
There's something super powerful about introducing multi-languages. Still one of my favorite things I ever saw happen was when I was in college. There was this guy, Nate Saint, came to speak at our college, and his dad, and I'm going to not remember it because I didn't prepare this at all. I'm just thinking about it off the top of my head. But his father was actually a missionary who was killed by natives, and it was somewhere in Central America or South America. It was somewhere down there. And, they reached out, and the people were afraid, and they killed them. And Nate and his mom went back to that village and basically spent the time with them, and they all became Christians. And so...
What a story.
Yeah. Well, you think that's a good story. And then he comes to speak at our school, and he brings this guy who's one of the guys that killed his dad, who he calls grandfather.
Wow.
And they start singing Amazing Grace together, him in English and the other guy in his language. And it's like,
redemption,
I dare you to not cry. I dare you.
That's beautiful.
I don't care how tough you are. There's not a dry eye.
I would cry.
You're a sociopath, actually. Or a
if
psychopath.
You don't shed a tear.
if your eyes aren't at least a little wet, you're a psychopath. If you watch that, and that's what happens. So, highly recommend it. You know who else I highly recommend?
What? Tell me.
Our guest today.
Whoa!
Matt McCoy is the founder of Loop Community, as well as Worship Innovators. I think we've talked about them on the podcast before. We had a really interesting conversation because when we first started Worship Artistry, obviously we teach people to play songs. That is our goal. The idea is hey, we want to train up people who need training. We also want your band to be able to play the songs. We don't want you to need to have tracks.
Yep.
That being so when I think our very first podcast episode actually was talking about using tracks in worship. And should you use that? Should you not? A lot of people have a lot of opinions about that. And so it was great to sit down with Matt. I've known him for quite some time now. And to just really hear his heart and really it even helped me shift my perspective on how I view tracks. Because I think a lot of times we get this picture in our brain that it's it's large churches to go big sound and it's all this stuff. And he actually really sees it very differently. He sees it here's how I use them. Here's how we can make things more artistic with them. Because I do think there's this feeling of, you're going to get stuck on a track and then you can't really lead worship because you're just playing to this track and it's not real anymore. And he kind of really dispels a lot of those a lot of those ideas. And I came away really inspired, and I was like, I got to start using some of these. This would actually be really fun. So really cool to hear the heart behind that, and to hear really how things came to be and why they're called Loop Community, as well as Worship Innovators, which we can talk about after the interview.
Yes.
So without further ado, Matt McCoy. Matt McCoy, Loop Community Mastermind, Worship Innovators Gatherer and Mastermind. So many things. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Man, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure and a joy to talk to you, Jason.
I enjoy it as well. I enjoy talking to you, not necessarily myself. I hear enough of myself on all my videos, so I don't need to hear myself more. But you always.
Well, thanks for having me, man.
Cool, man. Well, it's funny. I've been seeing your guys' stuff all over the place. You're popping up on my Instagram all over. And we've started working with you guys, creating worship artistry tracks and sending them your way. And so I thought it would be great today to just kind of go back, because even in that, people are like, what do you mean you have tracks now? Like, what does that even mean? And I'm like, oh, I thought this would be something that everybody would kind of know about. But I thought maybe we could kind of take a step back and just first even talk about, what are we even talking about when we're saying, like, okay, we're creating tracks and you can go get them on Loop Community. What are they getting? What are they and why?
Yep, it's a good question. Tracks, when people talk about tracks, and that term has actually kind of just changed over the years. But I think right now in 2022, if someone says they're using tracks, what they mean is that they're using a very fancy new version of backing tracks. So like there was a day way back in the day when people would just, and actually still some people do, like sing to an accompaniment track. And that's for someone maybe who doesn't have a band at all and they just need the instrumentation to support them. But when a worship leader typically now is saying they're using tracks, what they mean is they're using individual tracks to help supplement and enhance the sound of their band. So let's just say you're a worship leader at a church and you don't have a bass player. You're a small church, you've got a scrappy worship team, maybe just a few people, but you don't have anybody that knows how to play bass. Well, what you could do is you can use a bass track that's actually playing underneath your band. So your band is basically playing along with a bass track, but it helps fill in for that missing musician. And that's what most worship leaders are doing now as far as using tracks to enhance the sound of their band. So if you're missing an electric guitar player, you could have an electric guitar track, you could have a bass track, but also just supplemental tracks. Let's just say you have a full band. Like I lead worship every single weekend with a full band. Well, the tracks then that I'm using are like shakers or tambourines or a cool synth or arpeggiator track, any sort of element that's helped kind of lifting the quality of the band. It's another instrument in your band. You have to think of it as another instrument in your band.
Well, it's funny because a lot of times I think people think of tracks and they think about worship, they kind of put those two things together, but you can go see pretty much any band now.
Yeah.
And they're running tracks with what they're doing.
Yeah. Anyone. If you go see Justin Bieber, they're using tracks, Taylor Swift tracks, U2 even
right
is playing on tracks. If you listen to the tracks that U2 uses, they're just using like shakers and tambourines. And it's not much, but it's amazing how much just a tambourine track, especially a tambourine that's in time, will just kind of lift a song. And yeah, they're everywhere. It's Christian music, it's non-Christian music. If you go see Hillsong or Chris Tomlin or Elevation, they're all using tracks. And so if you've ever wondered, oh my gosh, how is this band of 4 people or 5 people sounding so massive, like huge? They have this full massive sound. How do they do that? Well, the trick, the secret sauce that a lot of people maybe don't know is that computer sitting up on stage back by the drummer is running tracks, backing tracks. And a lot of times people are like, well, that's cheating. Like you're not even playing your instrument. Like that's just kind of like you're singing along to a karaoke track. But it really is a frame of mind. Like I never see it as cheating because it's not like I'm pretending to play acoustic guitar, but there's just an acoustic guitar track playing. Basically the idea is you don't use tracks for instruments you really have. Like if I have a drummer, I'm not using a drum track, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not like pretending to play an instrument that I'm not actually playing. It's not like a lip sync kind of thing. But you use tracks for instruments you don't have. And so I really see it as another instrument in your band. Your computer is another instrument, another person, so to speak, in your band. That's just adding elements that you don't have to help your sound huge.
Well, I think that's a real key point that you make, is that you're not actually trying to replace the people that you have. I think sometimes like, what? You got an electric guitar track in there? Like, what am I doing here? And it's like, well, but that's because, I mean, part of the reason why I have a job is because we take these, songs and we break down, we look at all the tracks and all the stems and everything. And we go, okay, if I'm just a solo electric guitar player, what do I do for this song? And so we work and that's where all my time goes. The actual time of shooting videos and everything, very little compared to the amount of time I spend arranging, and I see on these songs how there are these 6 or 7 electric guitars on almost every song. And sometimes those are these kind of real quiet, just, you can barely even tell it's a guitar. It's this like ambient part, but it just kind of fills in space, right? That isn't being filled. And working across the frequency spectrum is what makes things sound full, right?
Yeah. It's just little stuff adds a huge difference. But you kind of said it right. That the area where this usually does go wrong is when a worship leader starts using like a track for an instrument that they already have in the band. And then that's a very fast way to really discourage the person in your band who's playing. So like, for example, if you're a worship leader, you show up with a piano track, but there's somebody on stage actually playing piano. Typically the complaint where we hear of like, oh, it's cheating, it's, you're playing to a backing track, it's coming from that piano player because they feel like they're being replaced.
Right.
And that's definitely the wrong way to use tracks. You should never use a track for an instrument you already have, because that for sure would make the person not feel great. But also it's just needless. It would clash. You would have 2 piano players playing against each other. It's not going to sound great.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's funny because I think a lot of times people think of, like tracks are for the big churches, right? They want to have these things, but you actually specifically pointed out the small church that doesn't have all the bells and whistles and all the different players. I mean, I've said before on this podcast, like right now, I know in my own church, like as a worship pastor, we've had so much change over the pandemic time. Like just, people have moved, people have taken other jobs, my team is I'm almost rebuilding it from the ground up, and being able to have some things that kind of fill in those spaces. And, it's those kind of going back to those little things, those little sounds that kind of fill in that space, those ambient things. Now, I always joke because in worship music, it seems like every song has a pad and has a little guitar like up high playing the little butterflies and whale sounds. But what that actually does is it allows you freedom as the player to not have to fill that space, right? It kind of fills that space for you. And all of a sudden now I'm not playing over silence. I'm playing over something that kind of allows me to rest in the song a little bit and just creates a lot more opportunity in the way that we approach it. So
I think these tracks are even really designed for small churches. Mm-hmm. I think tracks are an amazing tool for small churches. And that's actually why we started Loop Communities, because I came from church plants. My dad was a pastor. We planted little teeny churches, and we had barely any money. We had no musicians. And it's amazing how much a track will help fill out the sound. I'm actually leading worship in a couple of weeks at a new church plant near where I live. And they have maybe 50 people coming to the church, maybe more. But they don't have any worship band. It's just like a worship leader on a guitar. And I'm leading worship, and I'm going to use Enhancement Tracks, which are a type of track we have at Loop Community, which are they're not real instruments. It's more of like electronic elements. Mm-hmm. So just like a kick drum, maybe like a light dulcimer arpeggiator kind of thing, maybe a light shaker. You'd also don't want to overuse it because it could start sounding really weird.
Yeah.
But you can use these just little elements to just add a little bit of energy. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes it can feel so dead. You've got this room of 100 people, just a guy on an acoustic guitar. You could use some tracks just to help add some sort of life to it.
Well, and if you're used to playing, by yourself, a lot of folks mostly play at home, and if you're used to playing by yourself, and you don't record or anything, you don't realize the massive difference that having a little bit of a drum loop can make, or having things
just a little.
I'm an acoustic guitar player. I'm always I can just lead this on my own. I totally can. have the ability to do that. But it does make a difference when you have these other elements that you can then play off of. So how do you then stay flexible? I think a lot of times we think about tracks as like, well, if I do this, like I'm just on the train now, I start the button and now I have to play and the song is going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
And what about me is, I like to, play a little bit in the middle of this. I might dub I'm notorious to my team for just being like, we're just going to do that bridge again. Now just follow me. We're going to go do this again. Do they offer, how do you stay flexible while working with these other elements?
That's the amazing thing about using tracks in 2022 is that there was a day when you couldn't be flexible. Like it was just press play and hang on. Now you can be totally flexible where instead of you playing with the tracks play with you. Mm-hmm. Like instead of you being controlled by the track, you control the track. And the way you can do that, one way is we have an app at Loop Community that we developed for iPhone, iPad, Mac called Loop Community Prime. And it is a very simple app for running tracks. And you can customize, what instruments you want. You can change the key, the tempo. But another thing you can do with that app is you can be very spontaneous with it. So let's just say you're playing the chorus. You can actually press a button that's called repeat. And like it sounds, it will repeat that section of the song. So it'll actually go back and play the chorus again when you're finished playing the chorus. If you press it again, it'll repeat again. So you could do the chorus, 5 times if you wanted. Mm-hmm. And you can be completely spontaneous in that way. With the app, you can also jump to different sections of a song. So let's just say you're in the chorus and you're like, you know what? After this chorus, I really want to go back to the first verse. So you can tap on the verse. And when you get to the end of the chorus, it's going to jump to the verse. And the tracks are going to follow you. So it's completely customizable now, and you can be spontaneous in the moment.
Okay, I'll tell you right now, that is giving me a massive amount of anxiety thinking about playing my guitar and reaching out and pressing buttons. So do you recommend having somebody in your band that's kind of like more like a music director, kind of in charge of the tracks? Do you imagine the worship leader is the one doing it? Is there any way for them to do it with their feet? Like it's what do you think is kind of best practices?
It's such a good question, and it really is dependent on the worship leader. So for me personally, as a worship leader, I want to control the track. Like I want to be the person who does press that button. Mm-hmm. Because what I don't want to have happen, I don't know, maybe this is because I'm a control freak or something, but what I don't want to have happen is me try to signal to the band director like, oh, I'm really wanting to redo this chorus. And so I'm thinking, okay, we're going to do it. And then they didn't trigger the track because they maybe didn't understand my signal. And I go into the chorus, but the track doesn't.
That gives me even way more anxiety.
That freaks me out. Because how embarrassing. I mean, how bad would that be? Like you go to the chorus because you think that you gave the signal, but they didn't understand the signal. And so they didn't do it. So I prefer to have the control over that. Now, I know there are some churches who they have music directors who just kind of take care of that. Like I don't even know if the worship leaders have a say on where they're going. I think it's the music director that has the say. And in that case, you could have the music director back in the back running the tracks. That's totally fine. Mm-hmm. But let's just say you're like me and you're the worship leader who wants to control the track. What I would do is use a foot controller. So my feet aren't typically doing much during worship. And what you could do is press a button on a foot controller to signal a repeat button. So we have a foot controller at Loop Community called Looptimus. We have a big one that has a bunch of buttons on it, and then we have a little one that has 3 buttons on it. And that's what I would recommend if you're just getting started, just the 3-button controller. And what I would do is just map one of those buttons to be a repeat so that if you are in the moment, because I do think that most worship leaders, when they're being spontaneous, they really just want to repeat the section they're in. Like, hey, let's just do that bridge again. Mm-hmm. So when you're in the bridge and you want to repeat it, you just press the button with your foot, and it does not take that much thinking.
Right.
But just press the button with your foot, and then it's going to repeat the bridge. And then the job got done because you're the one that actually did it.
And you don't have to do that in time, right? Like, it's coming up. You just hit it. You don't have to be like 3, 2, 1 now. Like it's.
Yeah. You don't have to do it in time at all. As long as you do it before the end of the current section you're in, you're fine. So if you know you're going to do it, if you know you're going to repeat the bridge, then go ahead and just press it anytime during the bridge, and it'll repeat it when you're done singing the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And what's cool is that the click and the cues, so there's a metronome you're playing along with. That's like 1, 2, 3, 4. But there's also cues or band guides that are guiding you through the song that say things like chorus, 2, 3, 4, to let everybody in the band know exactly where they are.
Mm-hmm.
What's really cool is that when you press that repeat button, the app dynamically updates those cues to let everybody know where you're going next. So if you're repeating it, it knows to then say chorus 2, 3, 4. So everybody in the band also knows exactly what's happening. It's funny. It's kind of harder to explain than it is to, like, when you hear it and you see it, it totally makes sense. And it's actually a lot easier than it sounds.
Well, I love that you have loop to miss, and then you also have prime. So you have like loop to miss prime.
I know. And you know what? Not many people actually put those two things together.
I did right away. It was fantastic. I was like, I
know.
I like that. I like that a lot.
I would say like 1 out of 10 people will actually like put that together.
Well done, sir.
I appreciate you recognizing that.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because it's funny. I think maybe it might have been the very first podcast we ever did. So we're at like episode 160 or something now. I don't know where we're at. I think the very first one was like a discussion about tracks. Yeah. And, I very much came from a place of being like, I don't, it complicates things. I want the freedom. I want to be able to do all these different things. But it's interesting as time has progressed, and also having a band that's depending on me to let them know what's going on, and to know that, like, we use Proclaim at my church. We use Proclaim presentation software, and you kind of, I had to grab, like I said, I'm like patching everything right now. I'm just like, okay, I don't have anybody to do the slides today. Can you do it? But in order to do that, right, then I have to have it laid out in a way that this middle school girl can just hit the arrow button at the time when it's supposed to. And so having that flexibility and having those guys, I used to be like, I don't want a guide in my ear. I don't want, I'm an old school. I used to like to play in jam bands, no, we just feel it until we don't. But it's also funny. I think it's interesting how you mentioned, usually what you want to do is repeat. Like, in my brain, I'm doing all these very interesting different things, but ultimately it's like, oh, we're going to do a quiet repetition now. Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you start mapping what you actually do, you realize you actually do things very similar along the way.
Totally.
And so when Worship Artistry, when our guy, it was all my teachers going, why we're already recording these? Why aren't we making stem tracks for people? And I was like, well, all right, well, let's kind of dive back into it and see where there's value and see if we can do that. Like, does anybody want that? The answer is yes, apparently. And, but it is just amazing thinking about it more from that small church perspective, rather than, I always had that picture of like,
Big
you have to be super high tech. That's where it matters. And it does add, a sense of creativity. Like, I think a lot of times we look at it as it's being limiting, but it really adds more creativity. I think it kind of freshens songs that maybe you've done a million times. Well, now we'll do it with this track. Let's try and do it with this one. Or just fills those things out. It's pretty amazing.
And if you're playing to a click already, then adding in a track is not a big deal. Right. Most churches are playing. Well, I don't know if most churches actually are. A lot of it's definitely becoming more and more popular that churches are playing to a click track. I will say that anybody listening to this, the number one thing you could do, I think, to really enhance the sound and togetherness of your band is just to start playing with a metronome. You don't even need to use tracks. Just download a free metronome app in the App Store. Our app, you could download our app for free and make a metronome in it and make click tracks. That just staying to a consistent tempo will raise the quality of your band. Just because then people aren't speeding up and slowing down and clashing with each other. It's just everybody's on the same page, on the same beat together. And that is kind of an important thing for music.
Right.
And so, yeah, I highly recommend that. But once you have a click, you could add in a track super easy.
Right.
And it's funny you say, it's interesting because tracks really are for smaller churches, because when you think about like a song that maybe comes with like 10 tracks, and what I mean by that, it's like bass, drums, electric lead, electric rhythm, shaker, piano, pad. The bigger church you are, meaning probably more likely you have a bigger band, more resources, the fewer of those actual tracks and stems you use.
Right.
The smaller church you are, the more of those tracks you use, which is very, very interesting. But
and you guys do a great job of, I feel like, simplifying the track. You'll combine like rhythm guitars and like that sort of thing. It feels like your website, what you've done with Loop Community, is it's a very like clean interface, and it's easy to figure out, okay, this is what I need, and I can grab these and put them in the app and the whole deal. So I love the fact that your company is Loop Community. Who, like, because it's community, right? So who are actually making the tracks? So you have like, you'll have one song, but you'll have 10 different creators on that song. So like how does that play out? If I show up and I go, I mean, obviously we're like, go to follow Worship Artistry because you'll get our tracks or all the things that you're practicing along with, and you'll actually have a band that's exactly like the one you've been practicing along with. But there's also so many other ones. So how do you
where
choose?
the track's coming from? Yeah. So let me answer that question by starting by just basically, what does our name even mean? So Loop, we started Loop Community, probably 12 years ago. 12 years ago, the word for what we've been talking about in this entire podcast was loop. That was the word that worship leaders used. It was like, hey, like if I walked into a church and the sound guy was like, hey, are you playing with loops? That meant like tracks.
Right.
So loops. So there's a word for like the same thing. It's loops, tracks, backing tracks, stems, multi-tracks. All of those words kind of mean the same thing. It's just tracks. 12 years ago, people called them loops all the time. That's why it's called Loop, right? Loop. And then community was that we wanted to be a website where worship leaders could go and upload and sell the tracks that they made. So if you're a worship leader, Jason, right? And let's just say you record a track for What a Beautiful Name in your church studio, you can actually upload that to Loop Community and sell it and share it with other worship leaders all over the world. So I really wanted it to be a community of worship leaders who are uploading and sharing tracks with each other. So it's Loop Community. And so most of our tracks, we've got, 20,000 of them that are made by worship leaders from all over the world. Worship leaders make their own track, they upload it and share it. And it's kind of cool because you get different flair, you kind of get different feels of songs. We have probably 20 different tracks for This Is Amazing Grace, and they all kind of have a little bit of a different feel to them, which is kind of fun. But so we sell community tracks, but we also sell tracks from the record labels. And we call those master tracks. And so that's for people who want the original tracks from the album. So if you want the original tracks from Phil Wickham or from Bethel, then we have those as well. And what's really exciting, actually, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the past month, we've started releasing a bunch of new master tracks. We signed a deal with Maverick City recently with Bethel Music, and a couple weeks ago, we got Hillsong. So we've been posting all of Hillsong United, Hillsong Worship, and we've got a lot of more master tracks coming soon, which is really exciting.
That's awesome, man. It's so cool. I want to jump to two things real quick. One is, so in terms of licensing, I know a lot of churches are, can I show this video clip? Can I do this? How does it work for them? Do they have to get any kind of license or anything if they want to do a track? How does that work?
They don't need anything additional other than their normal CCLI license. So most churches who are actually who are doing worship at their church have a CCLI license. So you need that, but you need that regardless of whether you're using Loop Community or not.
Right.
But if you buy a track from us, you are licensed from us to use that track in your church service, as long as you have a CCLI license, which most churches already do anyway. So, but as far as like the track itself, you don't need anything else additional. You just buy the track from us and you're good to go. We try to make it really easy.
Very cool. You do. And
now, what is wild?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, what is interesting, I do want to say this though, because has been interesting is that with COVID, a lot of churches went online, and there needed to be a way for churches to be able to stream tracks and worship music on Facebook and YouTube or wherever you're doing your live service. And so We don't have anything for that, but CCLI released a streaming license that you can kind of add on to your CCLI license that you already have, and that will let you stream tracks on YouTube, Facebook, or wherever.
Very cool. Well, I love that you talked about CCLI, and I want to go back to the whole idea of community, because you have, you've really been the lead voice in bringing this whole Worship Innovators community together. We're involved. CCLI is involved. Brian Wall. There's a whole bunch of guys that you have gathered, and so I'd love to just hear where that idea came from for you, and what you see for the future of the Worship Innovators.
Yeah. Worship Innovators came from an idea of, as a business owner, I was also kind of feeling almost a little lonely in the industry and thinking like, you know what, there's a lot of other companies out there that are doing really cool things, resourcing worship leaders. And some of them are even competitors, we're actually in the same space. But I thought, from a Christian business perspective, like we might be competitors, but we're also in it for the same reason. Like we're in it for the same vision and to help resource the church and help worship leaders. And so I thought, we're all kind of climbing a lot of the same mountains, maybe facing a lot of the same obstacles, maybe having a lot of the same struggles. And I thought it would be cool if all these companies actually worked together in some way and build some sort of relationship, build bridges in between these companies rather than walls. And that's what I wanted to do with Worship Innovators. I thought, let's get all these companies talking with each other and helping each other, doing cross marketing with each other, or doing promotions with each other, or here I am on your podcast, and, we need to get you on our podcast. Actually, I think you are on our podcast.
I believe so.
So, but things like that. I mean, we've done things with Sunday Sounds, and it's been cool to kind of watch people do things with each other. I know we've got praise charts involved in that as well. And it's been cool to just watch more of this open hand mentality, of like, there's plenty of room at the table for everybody. Like no one is worried about this like scarcity of like, oh, this is my business and these are my customers. I can't let you have them. It's more of this open hand mentality. And I've seen that with Worship Innovators, which has been really cool. And that's the heart behind it. But then we took it a step further where we're like, we've got all these companies who are creating really innovative, very unique tools for worship leaders. What if we provided practical training for worship leaders? We've got all these companies who are experts in their field. What if we got them all together and hosted a conference? And so that's where the Worship Innovators Conference came from, where let's do a practical conference on technology, on training for worship leaders. So we've done 2 conferences. Unfortunately, we were going to do them in person, but then COVID hit, which is funny because we planned the whole thing to be in person. We had a ton of tickets sold, ready to go, and then COVID happened, so we had to pivot and go online. But we're actually planning on doing an in-person conference this coming fall, which is going to be really great. But we do this conference where we just get hundreds of worship leaders together from all over the world, literally, and learn from all of these innovator companies, praise charts, worship artistry, song select, CCLI, worship tutorials, worship leaders collective. I mean, it goes on and on. There's a long, long list, and it's just like, this isn't it's more of a practical training conference. Mm-hmm. And so how do you use tracks? How do you use lighting? How do you use chord charts? How do you write your own chord charts? How do you, tips for teaching your worship band the parts to songs, how to run better rehearsals, all sorts of practical training. So that's actually coming up this fall. So if you guys want to check that out or even rewatch one of our old ones, go to worshipinnovators.com.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the online conferences, we did 2 of them, and they are, I couldn't believe just what a joy they are.
Yeah, I was surprised too.
Because I'm sitting in front of a camera and I can edit myself and I make my lessons and I can fix all those things, all the mistakes I make or whatever. And so sometimes being in a live environment, it's stretching for me. It's like, okay, this isn't just me leading worship. This is something different, and I have to make sure I know what I'm doing. And get all ADD about it and, trying to figure it out. But I couldn't get over just how much I enjoyed being in the breakout sessions. Both leading my own and just seeing people all over the world. And then at the same time, also joining other ones. And like the group of people that you have assembled, I've been we've been doing worship artistry it's been about 10 years. And it's, you run into a lot of different kind of people and different motivations and all those kinds of things. And you have really, I remember the first time you called me and talked to me about Innovators and how, like, I was like, well, I want to make sure that like we're getting the people that are like want to just get under the kingdom of God and lift it up. Like that's what I am aiming for. And it's been just amazing to get to know everybody and their heart. And it's so encouraging. Like you said, it's people who are like sometimes competing in spaces and they're still finding ways to work together. And well, hey, you have this thing. Why don't we do this together? And it's just such a beautiful picture of the body of Christ working to serve the church. And it's so obvious. And then the Innovators Conference just kind of brings that together, brings all those people together, and you just get to know all these people that are behind all the stuff that you're using. Yeah. And really and it's also interesting to hear, where, it was great to hear where Planning Center came from. There's like just talking about like, I just never wanted this terrible thing to happen again. Yeah. Right. And so it's just such an amazing community that you've built. And it's a privilege to be a part of it. And it's always a joy to connect with everybody and connect with what you're doing.
I think what's been really cool to watch too is that it has kind of become a magnet for people who do have that heart. Mm-hmm. The people in the industry and running companies who actually really do have that heart of like, hey, we're in this together. We're stronger together. We want to help, all boats rise,
Mm-hmm.
This has become a magnet for those people, and they've come to it and they've been really involved and really interested. And I just think that's really cool. And so I'm excited about this coming conference. I was surprised how, it was hard moving from in-person to online. That was a really hard decision.
Yeah.
Because we almost just canceled it all together. Like, hey, let's just not even do it at all. But doing it online, I was actually surprised how engaged people were, how much people walked away from it really feeling connected. That was actually one of the main things we heard, is that they felt like connected, which is weird when you think about it, that we were actually online doing it.
Right.
So how much better will it be in person? I think it's going to be killer when we do it in person. So,
I mean, one of the highlights for me was on the last one, because we actually did like pre-recorded worship sets. And so, but it was so amazing to just, you have this video playing, but instead of pinning it to the top and everybody just looking at this video of us all synced together playing, which was cool. I couldn't get over how great that sounded. It's almost like you guys are good at like syncing things together with tracks and that sort of thing. You're pretty good at that. But just seeing, you led worship, Jenny McGrew led worship. We had some of our teachers lead worship, and then getting to actually see the gallery view. And I mean, dude, it was down south somewhere, but it was like a school. They had clearly like the whole class was there.
Yeah.
And they were just going for it. And it was just I mean, I was like welling up with tears. Like, here I am with all these people. I'm sitting in my office worshiping with these people all over the world.
Yeah. That
and
was awesome.
We're all here for the same thing. It's ridiculously amazing.
Yeah.
So,
I know.
Hey, if you're around in the fall,
yep.
Let's go hang out at Innovators together. It'll be good.
We're going to do it. It's going to be awesome. You can also rewatch those conferences if you want. Just go to Worship Innovators and you can grab it. And those worship videos you're talking about, those are on our YouTube channel.
Oh, fantastic.
So, but man, I'm glad that you have a part of that.
Oh, it's a gift. It really is a privilege. It's, I think when you're, I've been spending so much time thinking about stewarding what we've been given, and it's like, I just want to give it back to God. That's what I want to do. I want to push the kingdom forward. And it's awesome to not feel alone in that.
Yeah. Right.
Well, Matt, man, I could talk with you about Innovators forever too. So, you are a wealth of wisdom. We'll just have to have you back again. But, thank you so much for taking the time and hanging out. And
thanks for having me, man.
And head over to Loop Community. Try out Tracks. That app you guys made is incredible.
I may be biased, but I do think that it is the best and easiest way to use Tracks. I've been running Tracks. This makes me sound very old, but I've been running Tracks for 20 years. And it's actually hard to even believe Tracks have been around that long.
Right.
But
that doesn't even get us back into the 90s, though, man.
I know.
That's how far along we are.
That's true, yeah. And back then, like, using Tracks was really kind of complicated, honestly. And that was my heart of starting Loop Community too, of like, you know what? I have seen personally how much this has helped my ministry. And I want every church to be able to do this. But what I saw was that a lot of churches weren't doing it because it was so complicated. People were saying like, hey, I just want to focus on leading worship. I don't want to focus on a computer and controllers and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, you know what? That problem needs to be solved. This complicated thing of Tracks needs to be made easier. And so every product that we've developed at Loop Community has been with that in mind of how do we make a complicated thing easy. And so our app Prime, which we released in 2014, was, you know, at the time, a lot of worship leaders were using software called Ableton Live, which is not even meant for worship leaders. It's music software it's great, powerful, awesome music software. But worship leaders kind of figured out how to make it work for what they're doing. Worship leaders were probably using 10% of what that software can actually do and was built for. It's built for DJs.
It's like
in
using
clubs
Photoshop.
for remixing stuff. Yeah, totally. It was just overkill for most worship leaders. And so what we thought, we're like, you know what? Let's take all the features a worship leader uses in Ableton Live, and let's take those features and just put them into an app that works on an iPad that anybody can use, and it just gives the worship leader what they need. They need the ability to build a set list, change the key, change the tempo on the fly, change the arrangement of the song, adjust the volume of what instruments they want, and that's it. And honestly, I've completely moved to using our app whenever I lead worship, not just because I want to test it and use it, but because it really has made my life easier as a worship leader. So it's hard to say that without sounding like a total commercial, but I really do believe in it.
Well, it's free.
And it is free.
So you know what? Only one
it's
way
a free
to find
app,
out.
and then you buy the songs to use in it.
Right, there you go.
So, and I wish I had a promo code for you, because I would say, hey, everybody who wants to try, actually, let's just make up a promo code, all right?
Yep.
So anybody listening to this podcast, if they want to get a free, actually, well, I think the easier way to do it would be like $20 off, which would be basically a free track. $20 off a track. Use the code. How about code Jason Rocks?
That's great. I want to see that code get used. That sounds awesome.
All right. So use all caps, one word, Jason Rocks for $20 off, and that'll basically give you a free track. And you can just try it. Get our app. It's free, and then use that code, get a song that you want, and just give it a shot. I think that like once you do it, you'll be like, why have I not done this before?
Yeah.
It's one of those things.
It's incredible. I mean, you can change, one of the things we always get right is people want to change the keys when they're practicing along, because, we teach songs in the master recording. And so you're kind of working off of that, but you guys can easily do that with the tracks. You just
hit
drop
a button
it down, or
you
sounds
can
incredible.
just tap a button and it changes it in time, real time.
And you can practice all your worship artistry parts along with it and see how it actually fits.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good point. And actually, we have worship artistry tracks.
yep.
The simplified, what do you call them again?
We did that. We did the simplified Christmas carols, and then we did those. Those were all our original arrangements, and then we've also been essentially. So when we've put together a song at this point, we have all these teachers in different places, and we arrange it with this 5-piece arrangement. But we were like, you know what? We're already doing this. Why don't we just make sure that we record these really well, and then put them together? And that's one thing actually I wanted to say about you guys too is you guys have been really helpful with helping us make that transition. And also, obviously there's bound to be mistakes here and there, and you guys always catch those. You're like, oh, hey, you know what? Actually, this one vocal is a little bit off right here. Fix that. Or hey, it sounded like that one note was out of tune. Send us a fix for that. Like that kind of a thing. And so it's always great stuff. So it's been super fun.
Yeah.
It's way more fun for me to really feel like at the end we have an album worthy recording for people to learn off of. And so Loop community is a big part of that too. So
That's awesome, man.
all right.
Well, we appreciate you guys, man. Love your tracks. Love what you guys are doing.
Well, it's
Great
always
resources for worship leaders.
same thing to you.
Wow, what a great conversation you had.
It was a great conversation.
That's awesome. Tell me more about Worship Innovators.
Okay, so Worship Innovators really came about a couple of years ago. Matt he reached out to me out of nowhere and was just like, hey, we're trying to gather like-minded businesses, people who are who really care about the kingdom and care more about equipping the church than they do about owning all the business for themselves. And I was like, yeah, sign me up. Because I have to say, like, just from a heart standpoint, I very much look at worship artistry and what we do as like kingdom ministry.
Yeah, totally.
Like, that is what it's for. We are servants, and like, how do we do that? Everything we do is to try and advance that ministry. If I could give it away free, I would, but we got to pay bills. So, whatever. So, I got together with him, and it's been amazing because, worship tutorials, Brian Wall, right? Like, super fun because we've done a bunch of videos
Great
together.
guy.
And yeah, and people are like, I thought you guys were like enemies.
Never.
Like, no.
Friends.
Why would we be enemies? Like, no, I'm trying to teach guitar. Brian's teaching guitar.
Yeah.
Great. We've had him on the podcast. He's amazing. Praise Charts, Ryan Dahl over at Praise Charts, amazing. On Song. I'm not going to say everybody who's on this because there's too many.
There's so many great people.
All the guys from CCLI and Song Select. It is a group of people who are in some ways like competing, but it's like, well, the table's just big enough for everybody.
Yep.
And so how do we just bring more people to the table?
Yep.
And I think having that perspective is such a life-giving thing and so unusual in business. I've heard so many times like, well, there's right and there's wrong, but this is business. And it's like, if I can't do business with my values as a follower of Christ, then I don't want to do business,
Yeah.
So it's an amazing group of people. And then we're going to get all those people together and go do an in-person Worship Innovators Conference, which is on October 10th and 11th. It's going to be in Chicago. You can check it out at worshipinnovators.com. You can go get your tickets. All those people are going to be there, and it's very intentional about getting time to actually hang out. There's equipping times, and then also the point is to be able to connect with people and learn from each other and learn how to serve our people better with the technology that we use, as well as just overall heart and mission and all that kind of stuff. It is going to be a great time. The online ones were unreal.
Right. It has only been online the last few times.
Okay, so I got to tell you this. So when COVID first happened, we had the event was going to be planned in June. We'd already sold tickets. We'd already it was going, right? And Matt's like, hey, we need to all get together and talk. And we get on the call and everybody's there and we're all expecting Matt to say, so we're going to cancel the conference because we're not even allowed to leave our houses now.
Everything was being canceled.
And Matt just starts talking about, so on Monday, it's going to be this. On Tuesday, he's like reading through that slide. And finally, I think it's Ryan Dahl was like, Matt, can we maybe talk about the elephant in the room? First, maybe ask if we should do this. And he was like, yeah, I was getting to that.
Oh, 2020.
Yes. It's over. It's gone. It's in the rear view. It's in the rear view. So, man, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah,
I can't
it
wait.
sounds amazing.
My wife is going to go with me, which she's pumped about because she loves Chicago. I've never been except for being stuck in the airport many times. So it'll be cool to check out the city and hang out and meet all these amazing people. And we hope you go check it out as well. You can go to worshipinnovators.com to get your tickets, get it on the calendar. It's going to be better than you think it's going to be. It's going to be awesome.
It'll be really fun. If you want to use our worship technology, you can go to worshipartistry.com and get a free trial for 21 days and access over 600 different worship lessons and song tutorials and so much good stuff that'll help you every Sunday.
That number feels so big to me.
It's
sometimes
huge.
when I step back and go so I did 600 lessons and I really did 1,200 because I did acoustic guitar and electric guitar for both. So yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot of content there, but we also have bass, drums, keys, vocals. Vocals are going gangbusters right now. It's crazy how many new vocal lessons we have. And if you don't want to do that, you can always just head over to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and give us a review. That's always super helpful. We love to just get the word out about what we're doing and have conversations about this stuff with people on your team. Part of this podcast is to help you start conversations with your worship leaders, start it with your team members, and have something to talk about. So pass it around.